Before we get into the video, could everyone please subscribe to my HOA Karen Tales channel? Thank you so much. 911. What's your emergency? Yes, there's a trespasser on HOA property blocking the road. He refuses to leave. Send someone immediately. Ma'am, can you describe a suspect? It's a man in a work truck. He's parked like he owns the place. Understood. Officers are on their way. I leaned against my truck, arms crossed, watching as Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA, paced furiously by the roadside, phone pressed to her ear, barking demands at the dispatcher like she had them on speed dial. The funniest part? I wasn't on her property, not even close. This road, the one she was screaming about, was mine. Not rented, not shared, owned. Karen just didn't know it yet. This wasn't the first time she tried to exert her so-called authority over me. But today she'd taken it to a whole new level, calling 911 on the guy who literally designed and built the road she was trying to claim. I almost felt bad for the headache she was about to experience. Almost. A few weeks ago, when I first moved in, I had no idea the HOA in this area was run like a dictatorship. I deliberately bought my secluded dream property outside of HOA jurisdiction, just far enough from their rules and nonsense. My private road connected directly to the main highway, bypassing their entire neighborhood. It was the ultimate setup: peace, privacy, and zero HOA interference, or so I thought. The first time I met Karen was during my first week moving in. She strutted up my driveway like she was inspecting a crime scene, clipboard in hand, ready to issue violations to a house she had no control over. I had just stepped out of my truck when she blocked my path. "You can't park here," she snapped, looking at my driveway. I arched an eyebrow. "I can't park in my own driveway." She clicked her pen against the clipboard. "Driveways must adhere to HOA aesthetic guidelines. Trucks like yours should be parked in a garage, out of sight." I chuckled. "Yeah, well, good news. I'm not in the HOA." Her face contorted into the expression of someone who just bit into a lemon. "Excuse me." I gestured to the property lines clearly marked in the records. "My land isn't part of your HOA. Never has been, never will be." Karen's eyes flicked to the boundary line, then back to me. She scoffed, flipping her clipboard shut. "Well, if you're using the HOA roads, you're still subject to our regulations." I laughed outright at that. "Yeah, about that. This road? Not an HOA road. I built it." She blinked. "What?" I replied. "I designed it, paved it, paid for it. It's on my deed." For a solid 3 seconds, she said nothing, just processed. Then, like clockwork, the gears in her head jammed, and she went into full denial mode. "That's impossible. This road connects to HOA territory. It must be community property," I said, holding back a grin. "I legally own this stretch of road. It's private access to my property." She stood there fuming as if reality was personally attacking her. Then she stormed off, muttering about reviewing legal options and taking this to the board. That was 2 weeks ago. Since then, we had tried everything: sending violation letters, putting up phony signs claiming the road was private property, and even blocking my driveway with traffic cones. Each time, I calmly removed them and sent her a certified letter reminding her she had zero authority over me. Apparently, that wasn't enough, because now here we were with her escalating to 911 over a road she had no control over. The distant wail of sirens echoed through the trees. Karen stood tall, arms crossed, a smug expression creeping onto her face. She turned to me, lips curling into a sickly sweet grin. "You're in for it now," she sneered. "Let's see you explain this to the police." I shrugged. "Oh, I cannot wait." 2 patrol cars rolled up. Officers stepped out, hands on their belts, taking in the scene. One of them, an older cop with a clipboard, sighed like he had dealt with Karen before. "All right, what's going on here?" Karen immediately launched into a tirade. "This man is blocking an official HOA road. He's trespassing and refuses to leave. I demand you issue a citation and have him removed." The officer glanced at me. "Sir, can I see some ID?" I handed it over along with a printed copy of my property deed. "Actually, officer, this road belongs to me. It's legally part of my property and was never under HOA jurisdiction." Karen's smugness vanished in an instant. No, that can't be right. This is community access. The officer held up a hand. Ma'am, let me review this. He read through the deed, then glanced at Karen with a tired expression. Ma'am, this road is an HOA property. Karen blinked rapidly. What? That's a mistake. The second officer, who had been silent until now, let out a whistle. Wait a second. I recognize this name. You're the chief engineer who designed this road, aren't you? I smiled. Yep. Karen's face turned an impressive shade of red. No, he's lying. He can't be. The first officer sighed. Ma'am, you called 911 over a man using his own road. This is not a police matter, but he's blocking community access. The second officer turned to me. Sir, are you blocking any public roads? I gestured to the completely empty street behind me. Nope, just parked on my property. The officer turned back to Karen. Ma'am, you just filed a false police report. Her eyes went wide. Wait, I didn't. I thought. Filing false claims is a serious offense. The officer continued. If you persist, we may have to issue a citation. Karen looked like her entire world was collapsing. She opened her mouth to argue, then snapped it shut, fists clenched. I leaned against my truck, arms crossed, watching her internal meltdown with pure satisfaction. Finally, she turned on her heel and stormed away, muttering about taking this to the board. The officers shook their heads. People like her never quit. I laughed. Oh, I know this isn't over, not by a long shot. And I was right, because the HOA was about to escalate this into an all-out war, and they had no idea who they were messing with. The next morning, I walked out to grab my mail and nearly tripped over a massive stack of highway violation notices zip-tied to my front gate. Unbelievable. Karen had clearly spent the night drafting up every bogus infraction she could think of. I flipped through them, half amused, half annoyed. Illegal parking on highway property? Funny, considering I own the road. Failure to obtain approval for driveway modifications? Also hilarious, since I had built the road years before moving in. Obstruction of community traffic? I had one neighbor down the road, and he hated the HOA more than I did. I chuckled, shaking my head. This lady was determined to bend reality to her will, but if she thought a few sheets of paper were going to intimidate me, she was in for a rough ride. I grabbed the whole bundle, walked back inside, and tossed them straight into my shredder. Then I pulled out my phone and called my lawyer. Hey, I might need you on standby. The HOA is getting desperate. He sighed. Let me guess, Karen. You already know she's on a power trip. Stand your ground and keep everything documented. If they escalate, we'll hit them with harassment and fraud charges. I grinned. Sounds like a plan. Little did I know, Karen was already plotting her next move. Later that evening, I stepped outside to find orange traffic cones and a massive private HOA road sign blocking my driveway. I actually burst out laughing. She was getting desperate. I casually walked over and started kicking the cones aside. That's when I heard it. The sound of heels clicking furiously on pavement. Stop. You can't do that. I turned to see Karen storming down the road. HOA clipboard clutched in a white-knuckle grip. She was fuming. You are trespassing on HOA property. I leaned against my truck, arms crossed. Karen, we've been over this. It's not HOA property. She thrust a finger at the sign. The board voted this road is now part of the HOA. That means it's legally ours. I blinked, then blinked again. You voted my property away. She nodded smugly. That's not how property laws work, Karen. Well, the board says it does. I let out a slow, exaggerated sigh. Okay, let's play a game. You show me a legally binding document transferring this road to the HOA, and I'll leave. Karen scoffed. I don't have to prove anything to you. Exactly what I thought. I turned back to my driveway and casually yanked the HOA sign out of the ground. Karen let out a strangled gasp, like I had just committed a war crime. You can't do that. I'm calling the cops. And just like that, round 2 of 911 roulette had begun. 15 minutes later, 2 very familiar officers rolled up, the same ones from yesterday. Officer Martinez stepped out first, his expression already tired. Ma'am, you called 911 again? Karen crossed her arms. Yes, this man is vandalizing HOA property. The officer sighed. Ma'am, We literally explained yesterday that this road is not HOA property. Karen's face turned beet red. Well, I have a right to report suspicious activity. The second officer, Jenkins, rubbed his temples. Suspicious activity? The man is standing in his driveway. Karen huffed. I demand you arrest him for destruction of HOA property. Officer Martinez turned to me. Sir, what exactly did you do? I pointed at the sign lying on the ground. I removed a fake sign that she put up on my property. Officer Jenkins stifled a chuckle. That's it. I nodded. Martinez turned to Karen, his patience clearly wearing thin. Ma'am, filing repeated false police reports is a serious offense. You need to stop. Karen looked genuinely stunned. False? This is my neighborhood. I have every right to enforce community guidelines. Officer Jenkins leaned in. Ma'am, does the HOA own this road? She hesitated. Well, not technically. Martinez folded his arms. Then this is not your jurisdiction. Karen lost it. I will not be ignored. You can't just come in here and disrupt our community. I'll take this to the HOA board. Jenkins held up a hand. Ma'am, if you call us one more time over something that's been settled, we will press charges for filing false reports. Karen froze. For the first time, I saw a sliver of fear in her eyes. She looked between the officers, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. Finally, she snapped, "This isn't over," before storming off. I let out a breath and turned to the officers. I appreciate you guys dealing with this. Martinez chuckled. We deal with HOAs all the time. Karen's a special case. Jenkins smirked. You might want to get some popcorn, though. Something tells me she's just getting started. And unfortunately, he was right, because the HOA had just made things personal. The next morning, I woke up to a locked metal gate installed across my driveway with a freshly printed HOA sign. I stared at it for a long moment, then sighed. All right, Karen, you want to play? Play. And with that, I made a very important phone call because it was time to bring in the county inspectors. I stood in my driveway, staring at the brand new metal gate that had magically appeared overnight. It was bolted shut with a heavy-duty padlock and bore a freshly printed HOA sign, prohibited. Private HOA road. No trespassing. I rubbed my temples. Karen was escalating hard. I pulled out my phone and snapped a few photos, shaking my head. All right, Karen, if this is how you want to play it, let's go. I dialed the county inspector's office. Yeah, I need to report an illegal structure blocking my driveway. It's on my property. They promised to send someone out within the next 48 hours. That was 48 hours too long for me. I walked back into my garage, grabbed my bolt cutters, and walked up to the gate. With one clean snap, the padlock fell to the ground. Then, for good measure, I grabbed my power drill and unscrewed the entire gate from its hinges. By the time Karen showed up an hour later, the gate was in pieces, stacked neatly on the side of the road. I was waiting for her, lawn chair and iced tea in hand. She took one look at the missing gate and turned red like a stoplight. You vandalized HOA property. I sipped my tea. Nope. I removed an illegal obstruction from my property. She sputtered, looking around like she expected a find. Backup? You can't just do that. Sure, I can, I said, stretching out lazily. You know what else I can do? Report the HOA for illegal construction. That shut her up fast. I stood up and walked toward her, holding up my phone. I already called the county. They'll be here soon, and when they see what you did, well, let's just say fines start at $10,000. Her eyes bulged. You wouldn't dare. I grinned. Oh, Karen, you just don't know me yet. Her fists clenched. The HOA will not stand for this. We have rules. Rules that don't apply to me, I reminded her. I'm not in the HOA, remember? She let out a wordless shriek and stormed off, muttering something about calling an emergency board meeting. That was the moment I knew she wasn't backing down. She was doubling down. The next morning, I woke up to a fresh HOA lawsuit notice taped to my door. It accused me of trespassing on community property, removing an HOA-installed security structure, and disrupting neighborhood harmony. I snorted. Disrupting neighborhood harmony? Karen had lost her mind. But I wasn't worried. I called my lawyer. They finally did it, he chuckled. They filed a lawsuit, didn't they? Bingo. Good. That means they just walked into a legal disaster. You sure? Trust me, he said. We're about to bury them. Meanwhile, Karen had taken things a step further. I came home later that day to find a group of HOA board members standing at the end of my driveway, whispering and pointing at my house. As soon as I stepped out of my truck, one of them, a balding man with a ridiculous comb-over, stepped forward. Sir, he said in a voice that screamed fake authority, as representatives of the HOA board, we are here to formally request that you cease using HOA property immediately. I folded my arms. We've been over this. This road isn't yours. He held up a folder. According to the HOA charter, all roads leading to and from HOA neighborhoods fall under HOA governance. I smirked. You mean the charter you wrote yourselves? He cleared his throat. The bylaws clearly state. I cut him off. Your bylaws don't apply to my property. County records prove I own this road. Your board can't just vote to steal it. His face twitched. Well, we've consulted our lawyer. Great, I said, cutting him off again. Tell your lawyer to expect a lawsuit for harassment and attempted property theft. His confidence cracked. You wouldn't? Oh, I absolutely would. And you know what else? I'm calling the county inspector to report every illegal modification the HOA has done in the past decade. He went pale. Wait, let's not be hasty. I turned, already dialing. Too late. The next day, the county inspectors rolled in like an avenging army. They combed through HOA records, checking every permit, every road, every utility line, and the results? An absolute disaster for the HOA. Unauthorized modifications to sewage lines, illegal roadblocks installed without permits, falsified HOA property claims on public records. The county issued thousands of dollars in fines, and some violations were serious enough to warrant lawsuits. Of course, losing her mind, this is an attack on our community, she shrieked at the county officials. One inspector raised an eyebrow. Ma'am, this is an investigation into your HOA's illegal activities. She turned on me, eyes blazing. You did this. I shrugged. You really shouldn't have messed with the guy who built the road. But Karen wasn't done. That evening, I got one final notice from the HOA. They were calling for a mandatory emergency vote to purchase my road and force me into the HOA. I laughed so hard I nearly choked on my drink. That's not how property ownership works, my lawyer said when I showed him. I grinned. I know, but let's go watch the show anyway. The next HOA meeting was going to be legendary because this time I had one last trick up my sleeve, and Karen was about to learn what happens when you push the wrong guy too far. The HOA board meeting was packed. Karen stood at the front, face red with barely concealed rage, gripping the podium like it was the only thing keeping her from exploding into a full meltdown. The rest of the HOA board members sat behind her, visibly uncomfortable as residents filled the seats, murmuring amongst themselves. Some of them looked annoyed, others downright furious. This wasn't a normal meeting. This was a desperate attempt to clean up Karen's mess, and I was front and center, arms crossed, watching the show unfold. Karen cleared her throat, tapping the microphone aggressively. This emergency meeting has been called to discuss a very serious issue. A non-HOA member attempting to obstruct community infrastructure. I raised an eyebrow. She was really trying to spin this. Recently, she continued, we have experienced an influx of violations from an outside party attempting to undermine the integrity of this community. One of the residents stood up. You mean the guy you tried to steal a road from? A few murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Karen's eye twitched. I am speaking as your HOA president, and I will not tolerate. Another neighbor interrupted. Tolerate what? Getting caught breaking the law. More murmurs, some outright laughter. I leaned back, grinning. Oh, this was going to be fun. Karen took a deep breath, forcing a fake smile. This is why we are proposing a mandatory vote to purchase the road and formally integrate it into the HOA. I snorted so loudly it echoed through the room. Karen whipped her head toward me. Something funny? I stood up. Yeah, your entire plan. The crowd turned, watching me as I casually walked toward the front. You're trying to force my road into the HOA? I asked, shaking my head. Hate to break it to you, Karen, but that's not how property laws work. She smirked. The community can vote on acquisitions. It's in our bylaws. I grinned. You know what else is in the bylaws? Proper record keeping. Karen frowned. What does that mean? I reached into my bag and pulled out a fat stack of documents. I did some digging. Turns out the HOA has been illegally siphoning money from homeowners for road maintenance fees on roads they do. The room went dead silent. I slapped the documents onto the table in front of the board members. Here's a list of every illegal fee you charge homeowners. I turned to the crowd. How many of you have been paying extra road fees? Dozens of hands shot up. Karen's face turned ghost white. I smirked. Yeah, that's what I thought. One homeowner stood up, flipping through the papers. Wait, these charges go back 10 years. Another gasped. That's thousands of dollars per house. A chorus of angry shouts erupted from the crowd. One man turned to the board. Is this true? The treasurer, who had been suspiciously quiet all night, swallowed hard and nodded. The room exploded. That's fraud. Where's my money? We should press charges. Karen slammed the gavel down, panicking. Everyone calm down. This is a misunderstanding. I laughed. Misunderstanding? The county inspectors didn't think so. Karen froze. I pulled out one last folder. This is the official report from the county investigation. You know, the one I requested after you illegally blocked my driveway. The vice president skimmed the papers and visibly paled. Unauthorized utility modifications, illegal HOA roadblocks, misuse of community funds, unpaid county fines. He looked up at Karen. What did you do? Karen bolted from her chair, pointing a trembling finger at me. This is your fault. I shrugged. No, Karen, this is your fault. You tried to bully the wrong guy, and now your entire scam is falling apart. The treasurer stood up. I didn't know about the money scheme. The vice president turned on Karen. Did you know about this? Karen stammered. It's just a clerical error. One resident laughed bitterly. You mean the kind of clerical error that steals money from every homeowner? The vice president slammed his hands on the table. That's it. I'm calling for an immediate vote to remove Karen as HOA president. The room erupted in cheers. Karen's eyes went wide. You can't do that. I'm the HOA. I smirked. Not anymore, you're not. Within minutes, the vote was held. Karen was officially removed as HOA president in a landslide vote. She still stood there, shell-shocked, mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. This isn't over, she shrieked. I'll sue all of you. The vice president motioned to security. Please escort her out. Karen screamed in rage, kicking over a chair as security dragged her out of the room. And just like that, her reign of terror was over. The next day, the new HOA board members held a public apology meeting. They announced full refunds for every homeowner who was scammed by Karen's fake fees. All pending fines against me were voided. A formal agreement stated that my road was officially private property and would never be part of the HOA. I got a signed contract guaranteeing they would never try this stunt again. To celebrate, I installed a brand new sign at the entrance to my private road. Prohibited. Private property. HOA ban prohibited. That evening, my neighbor, one of the few people I actually liked, came over with a six-pack of beer. He raised a can to the man who took down Karen. I clinked my can against his. Highway is never messing with me again. We sat back watching the sunset over the now Karen-free neighborhood. As for Karen, I heard she moved into another HOA. Some people never learn. 2 days after Karen's dramatic removal from the HOA, the repercussions started hitting her like a freight train. First, there was the official HOA audit. Without Karen's interference, the new board dug deep into the financial records, uncovering even more shady transactions. Turns out, Karen had been skimming money from HOA funds for years, overcharging residents, pocketing late fees, and even using community funds to pay for her personal landscaping. And that was just the tip of the iceberg. The board released a public statement. We have discovered extensive financial misconduct under the previous leadership. Refunds will be issued to affected homeowners. We have also reported these findings to law enforcement. Karen's fate was sealed the moment the announcement dropped. Her neighbors turned on her like a pack of wolves. Homeowners flooded the HOA office with demands for full refunds, threats of lawsuits, and questions about how much money Karen had stolen. Then came the inevitable lawsuit. The HOA board filed an official civil suit against Karen for embezzlement, fraud, and mismanagement of funds. She was now facing tens of thousands of dollars in legal penalties, plus the possibility of criminal charges. Karen tried to fight back, of course. She hired a lawyer, stormed into the next HOA meeting, and screamed about character defamation and unjust accusations. But her own neighbors weren't buying it. They demanded answers. Where's our money, Karen? How long have you been stealing from us? Karen tried to weasel out of it, blaming the old accounting system, saying she was just following standard procedures. But then someone pulled out a printed email exchange between Karen and the HOA treasurer, showing that she had deliberately approved fraudulent charges. Karen's face turned ghost white. She stammered, she fumbled, and then she ran, literally. She grabbed her purse, pushed past the crowd, and stormed out of the building like a fugitive on the run. And that's when things really unraveled. The very next day, I was enjoying my morning coffee when my phone buzzed. It was my neighbor Tom. "Dude, check the HOA Facebook group now." I pulled it up and immediately burst out laughing. Karen had put her house up for sale. The listing description read, "Charming 4-bedroom home in a friendly HOA community. Motivated seller." The comments were brutal. Motivated seller? More like fleeing the scene of the crime. Will the new owner inherit the lawsuits too? Does the house come with a complimentary police investigation? Karen deleted the listing within an hour, but the damage was already done. Nobody wanted to buy a house in a neighborhood that had just been publicly exposed for HOA corruption. Property values plummeted, overnight, and homeowners blamed Karen. But Karen's real punishment? The IRS. With all the fraudulent records exposed, the new board reported her to the tax authorities. Turns out, when you embezzle funds and try to hide it, the IRS gets very interested in your financials. She got audited within weeks, and when it was all said and done, she owed more money than she could ever afford to pay. She tried to fight it. She tried to blame the HOA board. She even claimed discrimination. None of it worked. With legal battles piling up, a house she couldn't sell, and the IRS breathing down her neck, Karen was out of options. She finally snapped. One afternoon, I saw a moving truck outside her house. A few hours later, Karen herself emerged, frazzled, exhausted, and completely broken. She glared at me as I stood by my mailbox sipping coffee. I raised my cup in a mock toast. She flipped me off and got into her car, slamming the door as she pulled out of the driveway. My neighbor Tom strolled over, hands in his pockets. "So she's really gone?" I nodded. "Looks like it." Tom smirked. "Where's she moving to?" I chuckled. "I heard she's going to another HOA." Tom snorted. "Seriously?" I took another sip of my coffee. Some people never learn. And with that, Karen drove off into the sunset, broke, disgraced, and banned from her own neighborhood. Game over. With Karen finally gone, the entire neighborhood felt different. The air seemed lighter, the streets quieter, and most importantly, I could drive down my own private road without being harassed. It was like a curse had been lifted. For the first time in months, I didn't wake up to fake HOA notices, bullhorn speeches about community values, or the constant fear of what nonsense Karen would try next. Honestly, it felt damn good. The first HOA meeting without Karen was something out of a sitcom. I wasn't part of the HOA, obviously, but my neighbor Tom insisted I come just to watch the show, so I did. The new president, a guy named Greg who actually had a functioning brain, stood at the front of the room addressing the remaining board members and residents. "All right, first order of business. Undoing every stupid rule Karen put in place." The entire room burst into applause. Someone yelled, "Start with the grass height rule." Another shouted, "And the trash bin fines." Greg nodded. "Consider them gone." Then the treasurer stood up. "We also need to address the missing HOA funds. We've managed to recover some of what Karen stole, and we will be issuing partial refunds to homeowners who were overcharged." More applause. One guy muttered, "I might actually start liking this HOA now." I smirked. Miracles do happen. A few weeks later, things had completely settled down. Karen was officially gone. The HOA had stopped harassing non-members, and best of all, I finally got my official legal agreement stating that my private road was off limits to the HOA forever. To celebrate, I threw a small barbecue for the same neighbors, the ones who weren't Karen's disciples. Tom showed up first. While grilling burgers, we swapped war stories about the reign of terror that was now over. "You ever think she'll come back?" he asked, flipping a patty. I laughed. "Not unless she wants to face another HOA lawsuit." "Good," he said, "because I don't think we could handle another round of Queen Karen and her insane rules." Yeah, I chuckled. "Besides, I hear she moved to another house." Tom burst out laughing. Man, some people never learn. We clinked our drinks together and enjoyed the first peaceful evening in months. But there was one last thing I had to do, the final cherry on top. That weekend, I installed a brand new sign at the entrance to my road. Prohibited. Private property. HOA banned. Just below it, a second smaller sign. By order of the county, violators will be prosecuted. It was perfect. Every time an HOA board member drove past, they'd have to stare at it and remember how badly they lost. I made sure to get a good picture and posted it online, titled, "HOA Try to Steal My Road." Now it's HOA free forever. The comments were absolutely savage. "Victory tastes better when served cold." Congrats, man. The HOA wanted power. Now they have a lawsuit instead. Rolling on the floor laughing. That sign belongs in a museum. Now, at this point, you might be wondering, is this the end of HOA drama for me? Probably. But if I've learned anything from dealing with HOA nightmares, it's that there's always another Karen waiting in the wings. And when that day comes, I'll be ready. So what do you think? Have you ever had a crazy HOA experience like this? Do you think Karen will cause trouble in her next neighborhood? How would you have handled it if an HOA tried to steal your private road? Drop a comment below, hit that like button, and if you enjoyed this story, subscribe for more insane HOA tales because trust me, there's always more where this came from. Until next time, stay HOA free.